Hello, I'm Felicity Cohen. I'm so excited to introduce you to my Wellness Warriors podcast. For over 20 years, I've been a passionate advocate for helping thousands of Australians find solutions to treating obesity and health-related complications through surgical intervention and holistic managed care. My podcast is dedicated to all the people, past, present and future, who have helped shape my journey and continue to inspire me to work consistently to achieve a healthier Australia in both adults and future generations. I hope you enjoy it. Welcome to my Wellness Warriors podcast, Angela Counsel. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here with me today, and thank you so much for joining.
And thank you for having me, Felicity. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
So you've been now in lockdown in Sydney now, and I hate to remind you of that. It's probably the worst thing I can start with, but it's over 10 weeks now, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's just going on 10 weeks. I lost count. I was actually really lucky. Right at the very beginning, I was in Queensland. So I did actually get 1 week's break where I was actually scenic rim walking around, but then, yeah, back to lockdown since. So I did have that little bit of a reprieve right at the very beginning.
And one of the things that I think is important to highlight about how people are experiencing the challenges at this time, might be in relation to, and it could be hormonal, it could be those who are dealing with menopause type symptoms and weight regain, and it's a whole kind of host of contributing factors that may be having a negative impact on how they're going through or dealing with either perimenopause or menopause. So today, this is your area of expertise. It's all about menopause. But actually, before we get onto that, I am actually fascinated about kinesiology as well and what that means. So your professional career has been as a kinesiologist, naturopath for a number of years, before moving into the space of becoming an expert in the wellness space and looking after women with a vast array of issues relating to menopause. Tell me a little bit about kinesiology. What does that actually help us to learn, and how can it help us in a wellness journey space?
Okay, so kinesiology is a little bit of woo-woo. So basically it uses muscle testing. So it uses muscle testing to connect to the subconscious mind, because at a conscious level, we might say something, but our subconscious mind is actually saying something different. And particularly when you work in the field of weight, when we sit there going, I'm going to eat healthy, I'm going to eat healthy, I'm going to eat healthy, but there's this little voice that says, oh, that looks good. So kinesiology helps us talk to that little voice, and it just uses muscle testing. And really, it's just the body's way of telling us when our conscious and subconscious minds are in alignment, we will have a strong muscle. When they're not in alignment, we'll have a weak muscle. So it's really just telling us that when the subconscious mind doesn't agree with what we're saying, we get a weakness in the body. So that's a very simple way of explaining it. And I go through and I get people to make statements, and then I muscle test on the statements, and gives me an idea of whether or not their subconscious mind is on board with what they consciously want. So that's a really simple way of explaining it. It's more of an experience. You do have to experience to really understand it.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and I think many people don't actually really understand what kinesiology is all about and what kind of therapeutic approach it takes, and how it can help as part of a holistic approach to wellness.
Yeah, it is, and because it's very much emotional, but it also works on the physical level as well, because all physical issues have an emotional component, and sometimes we don't even understand what that emotional component is. So kinesiology just helps us to get to the emotional side of what's going on a physical level. So, and yes, it also helps us to clear all these unprocessed emotions and belief systems that we have, that we've basically grown up with, that maybe we got as children and we've brought it into our adulthood, that we don't even know is there, but it's there, and it's programming what's going on, and we don't realize these hidden programs that we all have.
Amazing. So in your practical experience and utilizing kinesiology in your practice over the time that you had your private practice, what are some of the most powerful things that you have witnessed or learned about utilizing kinesiology as a therapeutic treatment?
It is really about the releasing of the emotions, that once we can release the emotions, it's amazing that people then just start to feel better because they're in a different energy space. Because you can sit in a space of woe is me, everything's really bad, and everything kind of draws you down. And whilst you might think that the issue is physical, when we actually do a session and clear whatever that hidden emotion is, and we within the form of kinesiology I also use Chinese medicine, so the 5 element theories, I use crystals, so use a whole pile of modalities brought into one. And it's amazing that once someone gets to the end of a session, they go, actually, that ache that I had in my neck, it's gone. And well, we didn't even talk about the ache in their neck, but it may have been rated 8 out of 10 at how bad it was. But what they've done essentially, and this is the essence of everything I do, is they brought the stress down. And once you bring the stress down, your body changes, because when we're in a stress situation on a physiological level, our body actually goes into this stress response, and it can tighten muscles up, it can speed the heart rate up, it does all of these things. And when we bring that that stress down, all of a sudden the body can rebalance itself. So there's lots of different situations, but really it's just when any time someone gets to the end of a session and they go, I actually can't feel that anymore, it's not there. And that's when it tells me that we've actually just cleared something.
Very powerful to see someone experience that level of release at the end of one session.
Oh yeah, it's amazing. And look, it's not just what, we do it. We do notice a difference at the end of one session, but we do need to keep doing it because there's deeper and deeper issues. So rarely will someone get complete healing within one session. Because there's always layers upon layers upon layers upon layers. So we just go to each of the layers, and each time they feel that little bit different. And then the next time we do it, we feel different. So it just keeps going, because there's always lots to clear. Unfortunately, we're humans and we got a lot of baggage.
So in your private practice, over a 10-year span of working in the space of kinesiology combined with naturopathy, tell me a little bit about your naturopathy practice. Obviously, it's utilizing nutritional medical techniques and all sorts of things to treat. What was tell me about your naturopathic journey and
okay, yeah. So I've been a naturopath for nearly 20 years, and I've been working primarily in the space of women's health. But I didn't become a naturopath until, I was a corporate warrior. I used to be in the corporate world, highly stressed, highly paid. I was a consultant, but my life was kind of falling apart. And then I decided to take a little bit of a break to just see what else was out in the world, decided to start doing naturopathy. I had a miscarriage at work. And then once I started studying, I fell pregnant, and my eldest son is nearly 20. And I had another child after that too. So I studied when I was breastfeeding. I was pregnant for 5 years as I continued to do all my study. And then I was practicing as a naturopath. And, so in that time, when I started, I was working with women with babies, then women with young children. So I have always been a few years ahead of my clients. So it's like, once I kind of get through a stage of life, it's like, I've got stuff to share. So that's what I've done. And because now I work in the menopause space, because I am already through menopause, so I'm postmenopausal. And the big thing for me, and even though I had worked in women's hormones, I'd help women have babies, rebalance their hormones, get their cycles, all of that going. I did all of that, and I really didn't understand menopause. When I studied it, I think it was like 15 minutes shoved at the end of a term, and it was not really talked about. So I didn't understand what menopause was about, apart from hot flushes and mood swings. And then I experienced it. So for me, as I went through it, and my biggest issues were I had unbelievable body and joint pain, and then the weight started just to come on for no reason. And it didn't matter what I did, I couldn't lose weight. In the past, I would do keto diet, I'd be able to drop the weight. I couldn't do it anymore. Every time I tried to do a keto diet, all I wanted to do was eat a whole pile of carbs. So it wasn't working for me. And then I started talking to other women and they were having the same issue. So I needed to find answers, but not just from a weight point of view. I was more concerned about how do women live a healthy life once their hormones have started to shift? Because we get told that when you don't have the hormones anymore, that everything starts to break down, that, you know, your bones break down, that you're a higher risk of heart disease. We get told that our bodies break down, you know, because our hormones are coming down. That's not actually the truth. And the more I delved into this space, and there wasn't a lot of research at the time, there is now, there's a lot more research being done, and starting to realize exactly what is happening. And I always believe that the body knows what to do. So I didn't think there was any mistake with women going into menopause. So this, you know, narrative that your body breaks down didn't seem right to me, because that's not how the body works. It always brings itself into balance and it adjusts itself. So that's kind of how I've got to be doing what I'm doing now, sharing the message that it is possible to move through menopause with ease. It is possible to drop kilos as you move through menopause, even though it seems like you can't. It is possible to not have all these symptoms, and it is possible to do this without having to take a whole pile of pills and potions. And I work primarily, even though I'm a naturopath, I rarely prescribe anything these days. Everything I do is diet and lifestyle. The most I would prescribe for most people is magnesium, unless they have a specific issue going on. But when it comes to menopause, I don't believe we treat menopause. Menopause is a stage of life, and women just need to be supported through it, and looking at their diet, their lifestyle, their stress. And as we manage all of that, everything just calms down for them.
So before you went into becoming a naturopath and kinesiologist, you had this high-powered corporate lifestyle that delayed your first pregnancy. And I think your first pregnancy was around about age 36.
No, 40.
Oh, 40. Wow. Okay.
I was 40 when I had my first and 43 when I had my second.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that having children later, which is very common these days, more and more often, has that had do you think it delays or changes the way you actually experience menopause when you get there?
Well, for me, and at the time I didn't realize it, because most people don't realize that for menopause, the stage of perimenopause, which is the time before menopause, so menopause is really just like a line in the sand. So when you haven't had a period for 12 months, basically that's menopause. After that, you're in postmenopause. Before that, you're in perimenopause. So menopause is just a line in the sand. It's a transition. I call it a transition. But that menopausal transition can start 10 to 12 years before you actually have your final period. So for me, because I came from being pregnant, breastfeeding, being pregnant, breastfeeding, at the time I was under the influence of pregnancy and breastfeeding hormones. But as I came out of that, I was tired, I was run down, but I just thought it was because I had 2 young children. Now looking back, I realize it's more than likely because those hormones, that like the transition of the hormonal journey had already started on the downward trend. Now, because my period was regular, it wasn't even in my frame of reference that anything could be going on. And it didn't really hit me until I got to about 54. And then all of a sudden, everything just seemed to fall apart. And that's when I realized that this was menopause for me. And I was almost at the end of having my periods then. They weren't as regular. But that time between, you know, my last child finishing breastfeeding and then, which was probably 7 or 8 years, I was in perimenopause, but I didn't know it because I just thought I was a mum, an older mum who was tired, who was trying to run a business and bring up 2 children at the same time. And I just thought that was just life. And that's it. Women think that is just life.
I think that's so true, and so many of us actually just think that and believe that and try and just have this attitude of, you know, you've got to just put up with it and soldier on kind of attitude.
Yeah.
It's how we're built. Did you consult with a doctor at the time that you were experiencing those menopause symptoms yourself, and were you ever prescribed anything that you thought, I don't know if I want to take this journey?
No, I'm not into doctors that much. I listen to my body. And yes, I took things for me. So there were herbs that I was taking. There's nutrient supplements that I was taking. So, and I did work with other health professionals. I just not doctors. So I have an acupuncturist. I have a massage therapist. So, I do a chiropractor. So I work with other health professionals. Unfortunately, I won't go any further on that, but I work with other health professionals.
Sure, and I love it. It's a great idea that we can look at. There are alternatives. You don't have to go on, antidepressants or HRT, and you talk a lot about that in your body of work. You also talk about menobelly being real, and that's something that people experience, and it's something that, yes, people put up with, but they get stuck and they think, well, what am I going to do about it? And it becomes quite a desperate stage of panic. Tell me a little bit about how menobelly, is it real?
Oh, it's real. Just ask any woman. Now, it's not real for 100% of women, but the majority of women experience menobelly. And anyone who doesn't know what we're talking about, menobelly is that weight that sits around your waist that seems to come on out of nowhere because you haven't, you've not changed what you're eating, you haven't changed your exercise, nothing's really changed, but all of a sudden this weight's coming on and nothing you do will shift it. It's just really, really hard. And it does tend to sit around the belly, can also sit around the hips and the thighs. But when we look at where the weight sits, it gives us an idea of what's going on with the body. So weight that's sitting around the belly is very often associated with high stress, so high cortisol levels or high insulin, insulin resistance. So both of those are impacted by your reproductive hormone. So as your estrogen levels come down, women naturally go into an insulin resistance state, particularly if they have a tendency towards that over the years due to their diet, their lifestyle, not eating the right foods, drinking too much alcohol, too much stress, pushes you naturally into insulin resistance. But as your hormones shift, you will go straight into insulin resistance. And if we don't address that, that is going to get worse, because insulin resistance, as you know, is the precursor to diabetes. So we do really need to start looking at what's going on with insulin resistance. And we also need to be considering what's happening with stress, so cortisol levels, because cortisol also puts the weight on around the belly. If you're holding a lot of weight around the hips and thighs, it tends to be more of a thyroid issue. Once again, as we move through menopause, thyroid can get more sluggish. Stress impacts that, insulin resistance impacts that. So everything kind of works together, but we only ever talk about estrogen levels dropping. And some women know, the progesterone drops too, but the reproductive hormones on their own are not the only cause of this. It is the cortisol, it is the insulin, it is the thyroid, and they all interact with each other. It's like this big spider's web. Nothing works on its own. And when we kind of understand that it is natural for hormones to drop, and we do want them to drop because we're no longer producing eggs every month, we're no longer ovulating every month, we don't need to prepare a uterus every month for pregnancy, we don't need that higher level of hormone anymore. So we do actually want it to drop, but we also need to be considering what else is going on and how all the other hormones are interacting with each other, because that's what causes the menobelly. That's what causes, the hot flushes, the sleep issues. All of that it's all caused by stress, insulin, thyroid, as well as the reproductive hormones.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's very important to understand for many people that abdominal fat, or that menobelly that you refer to, it can be a precursor or an indicator for potential risk factors for cardiovascular health as well. And definitely, when we're concerned about all of the metabolic type disease indicators that are linked together, it is really important to be aware of reducing those potential risk factors, because any of those conditions that are associated with being even a little bit of, if there is excess weight, they're going to get progressively worse. So the more we can work on reducing them and finding better solutions, better options to prevention is always better than cure.
Yep.
And I guess if people are starting to experience all of those things in that perimenopausal phase, it would be great to start looking at, what are the preventative measures that people can take before it gets worse, first of all, before they suddenly find it's a big problem.
Yeah, because what we don't see many women see menopause as like the beginning of the end. In fact, menopause is a window of opportunity. We actually have a window of opportunity at this time of life because our hormones shift, and hormones are chemical messages that tell the body what to do. our body is changing. You know, they used to always call menopause the change. Well, that's not far from the truth, because our body is changing. It's changing the way it's functioning, because we no longer have the high level of reproductive hormones, and the way the reproductive hormones interact with other hormones in other parts of the body is changing. So rather than trying to get the body back that you had when you were 20 or 30, it's like, well, okay, what do I want for the next half of our life? Because if we think, well, women come into this time of life around their late 40s, you know, early 50s, we've got at least 40 odd years to go, 50, depending on how long you think you're going to live. It's like, so what do we want the next half of our life to be like? And we kind of have this open window, and it's not open for very long, because once you're through menopause and you're about 5 years through menopause, it is very hard to change anything, because your hormones have resettled at their lower rate. They're not really going to change. The body's kind of gone into a new normal. So you've got this window whereby you can say, well, what can I do differently to create my health for the next half of my life? And that is looking at the food you're eating, the way you're moving, and it's more than likely not the same way that you did things in the past, because your body is now different. And understanding, yes, you're higher risk of insulin resistance because you don't have particular hormones. You're higher risk of having, you know, metabolic thyroid issues, stress, all of that are all impacting, but we can control that, and we can bring that under control if we get in there and we start making changes at the right time.
Amazing. Some of the things that you talk about avoiding are, I think there's 5 specific categories when we're looking at diet and other things that can influence us. Obviously the toxic elements that we'd like to get rid of, so using plastics, but then red meat, dairy, grains, and I think there's one other that you talk about as being things we need to eliminate.
Oh, that would either be, that will be both sugar and alcohol. Alcohol. Yeah. Because all of those foods are highly inflammatory. Now, a very common symptom that women complain about, and this was my symptom as well, is joint and body pain. And this is actually a relatively new symptom for women. And it's because now the life we live, we're more active. And, you know, if we go back a couple of generations, when women kind of got to their 50s or so, things were slowing down for them. They were grandmothers. I mean, I can remember looking at my grandmother when I was 5. My grandmother was probably only 50, but she was always so old and she looked old, and, you know, she was a grandmother. But when now a 50-year-old woman is vibrant and is vital, but they are experiencing this pain. And when I started to experience it, I didn't click that it had anything to do with menopause. And all I was doing was trying to take a whole pile of anti-inflammatories, until I realized, even though I had a relatively healthy diet, there were some things in my diet that were actually still causing inflammation. And estrogen is a natural anti-inflammatory. So as your estrogen levels come down, any underlying inflammation that's there starts to come out, and this is the pain. Now, for me, the big issue for a majority of women, I'm really sorry to say this, is alcohol. I was never a big drinker. I used to have a glass of wine on a Saturday night with dinner, you know, and it was half with mineral water, half wine, and I did 1 or 2 of them, and that was all I would drink. But that was enough to keep me in constant pain. And finally, one day I was over being in pain, and I just went, okay, I'm just going to stop the alcohol 100% and see what happens. My pain went away. I haven't drunk anything in 3 years. Oh, sorry. Except for when I did the 5-day hike in Queensland. When we finished, they gave us we celebrated with a glass of champagne, and I thought, oh, look, you know, I've just walked 65 kilometres or something over 5 days. I'm just going to have half a glass of champagne. Now, every night after I'd walked, and I was walking 16, 18 kilometres a night, I really wasn't in pain. But that particular night, I could not sleep with the amount of pain I was in. And I know it was because I had half a glass of champagne. It triggered an immediate inflammation response in me. So I know that alcohol is still something that I can't drink because it's too inflammatory for my body. I don't want to be in pain because I want to be able to get up and live and move. And walking for me in the bush is like, it's my savior, particularly when I'm locked in my house most of the time. So for me, giving up that alcohol was, the benefits were far way outweighed the other side of it. the niceness of it.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. Let's go through some of those other things. I think with sugar, linked to the fact that people maybe are having poor quality sleep, then they're looking for the next quick fix. So energy sources might be, I'm going to have high energy dense or sugary type foods.
Mm-hmm.
Really poor choice, often combined with too much caffeine. And
Yes.
we that, so there's lots of elements in the sugar. How do we kind of talk to people about reducing their sugar intake?
Well, for me, it's always when you start to look at your symptoms. So whatever your symptoms are, now, obviously, if it's, we'll just put the weight to the side for the moment, but any other symptoms, if you're experiencing hot flushes, if you're experiencing mood swings, start to keep a diary and start to notice what triggers them. And you will start to notice that certain foods trigger certain things. Caffeine will trigger a hot flush because it puts a load on your adrenal glands, and hot flushes occur when there's basically when the HPA axis, so hypothalamic, pituitary, and adrenal glands axis goes out of balance, that triggers a hot flush. So when we put load on the adrenal glands, then we're likely to have a hot flush. That's what coffee does. When we eat certain foods, we're stressing the body, so it will actually give us pain, or it will stop us from sleeping properly. And then when we come to the weight, well, we've already spoken about insulin resistance. Yep. So it's like, if you want to lose the weight, if you want to shift that, we need to bring the insulin down. And the only way we can bring that insulin down, or the insulin response down, is by changing what goes into our mouth. Because the thing that triggers insulin is the stuff we put in our mouth. So if we're really, really serious about this, we do need to actually start going, well, what could I do differently? By adding more fiber into your food, you then actually slow down that insulin response. So having, so eating a whole piece of fruit is better than having a glass of fruit juice, because we've got the fiber. So we want the fiber to slow the insulin response down. When we just have juice, all we've got is sugar water and there's no fiber in there. So we just need to start to look at what are we eating. And also, from an emotional point of view, why are you eating it? Because your body doesn't need that sugar. If your energy levels are down, there's a reason for that. It's because you don't have the right nutrients going into your body. You're not fueling your energy cells, or you've got too much toxins going in there. So if we start to look at it, the body doesn't need all this sugar, particularly in the form that it comes to. So why are you really doing it? And there'll be an emotional reason. There'll be a reason that it's like, for now, at the moment, people are sitting in lockdown going, well, I can do nothing else but eat. So I just can't eat what's here. It's like, well, don't buy it, because that's just an excuse. I tell you, in lockdown, when we very first went into all of this, beginning of last year, I lost weight because I didn't eat that stuff. So it is a choice. And this is where, when I use the kinesiology, it's like, why are you doing it? Or just talking to women and going, well, what are you missing out on? What hole is the food filling up? Because it's filling up a hole. Something is missing, whether or not you don't have connection. So for women that need lots of connection and all of a sudden they've been separated, they will eat to fill that hole. If they don't have space, some women, all of a sudden you're at home and everybody else is at home, so you don't have your space anymore. So they eat to fill that hole. So it's like, what are you really looking for? Because guaranteed your body is not asking you to go and eat that chocolate bar or Mars bar. But having said that, I do eat chocolate nearly every single day. I eat dark chocolate, and that's fine, but it's only a small piece, and that's my treat after lunch. But it's like, we've got to look at what we are what we're eating.
So the other three things that I've seen you talk about are red meat, dairy, and bread or grains.
Like gluten, yeah.
Gluten. So can you talk me through what happens and why, when we get to perimenopause or menopausal, we should eliminate or reduce drastically those food types?
So once again, because they're all inflammatory, and particularly when we look at dairy and the casein molecule, which is in dairy, it's the protein, and gluten, which is the protein in wheat. Those two proteins actually look very, very similar. And they're also very similar to another protein, which is the opioid protein. So, which is why dairy and gluten can be a little bit addictive, and it's hard to give up. But it's very hard. They're very large molecules, and it's very hard for the body to break them down. We need specific digestive enzymes to actually break down those particular molecules. As we get older, we don't actually we're not making as much of that enzyme. And that actually starts from the time we're in our 30s. We actually start to lose some of those natural enzymes. So we can't break down those large molecules. So now we've got molecules which are now not completely broken down, so they can't be absorbed. So then they start to irritate the gut wall, and this all causes inflammation. So having a small amount is probably not a problem, but I know for women, you know, cheese is always quite a nice thing because it goes really nice with the red wine. But when we eat too much, we're causing inflammation. So all of this is about how can we bring down inflammation, or what is causing inflammation in my body. Same with red meat. Now, I was always a really big red meat eater. And like I used to do paleo keto, that was kind of my way of living. So full on for red meat. And if someone had said to me, stop eating red meat, I would have gone, oh my God, you've cut my throat. Now I'm not completely vegetarian, but I am very specific as to when I have my animal proteins. I don't have animal proteins at night, and there's a reason for that, particularly if you're overweight and you're struggling to lose weight. Animal proteins trigger an insulin response. We don't want to trigger this at nighttime. It's okay during the daytime because we're going to be moving, but if you do this at night, then you're more likely to be storing more fat, because if you've got too much insulin going around, if it doesn't get taken up, you know, the blood glucose doesn't get taken up by the cells, insulin then converts it over to fat and stores it around the organs. So we don't want this process happening at night when we can't actually be using up all of our glucose. So I don't eat much red meat anyway. I tend to eat more chicken, but my animal proteins I have in the middle of the day, but I have them with a massive, great big bowl of vegetables as well. So I kind of keep that balance going there. But at nighttime, if I eat dinner, it's plant-based only, so it's vegetables only. And just by doing that helps to get this insulin resistance under control, because this is what we're trying to do. And for me, I personally intermittent fast, but intermittent fasting isn't for everybody. So I do personalized health, and understanding people's genetics and their epigenetic influences, we then can determine what the right eating style is for an individual. So for me, intermittent fasting works well. But for other people, there are some people who need to eat 5 meals a day. I eat 2. I have breakfast, I have lunch. Rarely eat dinner. Sometimes I eat dinner. If I do, it's just a vegetable-based dinner. So that works really well for me. But for other people, they need to be eating smaller meals every couple of hours. But we need to understand the right eating style for each person. And when we can adapt the right eating style for a particular person based on their genetic makeup, then you start to notice that the body starts to rebalance itself, the stress comes down, the inflammation comes down, and you start to feel better. Now, there are some people who actually do better on a higher meat diet, but once again, it's just, we have to be careful we're not eating too much, and we're not, it's the balance between the meat and the vegetables. And the reason why I tend to tell people, because my clients, when they come to me, it's normally a weight issue, and because when I look at their health type, which is their genetic health type, I know that they have the type of body that would do better on less meat as opposed to someone else. So just because I know the kind of the genetic makeup of my clients, I've got a pretty good idea just by looking at their body shape where they are. So so some bodies do need to be having meat, others don't. And I'm not saying everyone has to be vegetarian or vegan or anything like that. It's just getting the balance and understanding what your goals are when it comes to health as to how much and when you eat these things. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And how about making sure that we're still getting adequate protein and calcium from a plant-based diet or from vegetables?
Well, see, that's why you can get protein, you can get calcium from vegetables, but you don't have to be totally a vegetarian. I'm not saying don't have them, I just minimize them. And particularly if it is red meat, just be careful of how much you're eating, and also be aware of the source, because the quality of meat plays a really big role. So when I eat, my meat that we have comes from a free-range butcher. It's actually called the free-range butcher. So I know that the meat has been raised on grass. It's not grain-fed, because that's another issue. Grain-fed beef, whilst it's kind of touted as being really good quality beef, it's not really, because they use the grain to fatten the cows up really fast, which in essence kind of puts them into an insulin resistant state because they've got all this grain. It does the same thing to us cows it does to us human. And we don't want to be eating that food, because that gives the same message to our body that this is the way our body needs to respond. So if you're eating meat, that's fine, but probably you don't need to be eating meat 7 days a week, and you don't need to be eating large amounts, and also the quality of the meat. So grass-fed is always better. The omegas are better on a grass-fed than a grain-fed beef. So it is about the quality, and start to mix it up. And so you'll get plenty of protein, you'll get plenty of calcium, you'll get plenty of iron. We don't need as much iron once we're not bleeding on a regular level, regular state. If you're bleeding heavily, now this is interesting, because if you bleed heavily, you can lead to iron deficiency, but iron deficiency can lead to bleeding heavily. It's kind of like this never-ending circle, and it's like, how do we stop that? And sometimes at that stage you would then have to supplement so you can get the iron levels up. And I also use herbs to stop that heavy bleeding, but that can be an issue for some women as they come through this perimenopause stage of life. So it's something that sometimes does need to be controlled, because we need to stop it, because the more they bleed, the less iron they have, and then the less iron they have, the more they bleed. So it's like, okay, what do? We give you some herbs to stop that bleeding, and now let's just supplement your iron to get your iron levels back up so that we can kind of get that under control. But then, having said that, one of the underlying causes of heavy bleeding, particularly in this time of life, is too much dairy consumption, because it's highly inflammatory. And I had one client who was like drinking nearly 1 litre of milk a day, every single day. She was just so addicted to it, and she was having cheese and everything. Her bleeding was out of control, and we just couldn't stop the bleeding. And then when I said, okay, look, you just got to cut back the dairies to start with, I said, take it out completely. That's it, take it out completely, so that we could get the bleeding under control. And then we just put back a little bit that she had in her tea, I think it was her tea, but we had to really change, because it was the inflammation of all of that dairy was actually causing her to bleed more, and the more she bled, the worse she felt. So it's like, we've just got to look at what what foods we're putting in and how that's impacting our body. So no one needs to be drinking 1 litre of milk a day, particularly not a 50-year-old woman, because we're well past being weaned. But that doesn't mean you can't put some milk in your cooking or in your coffee, or having a bit of cheese. That doesn't really matter. It's like keeping the levels to a normal level.
What about stress? Do you think stress levels can bring on early onset menopause, or what other impact does stress have on that whole?
Oh, stress is it is the single most important thing that we need to be looking at. Stress causes everything. So yes, it can bring on early onset menopause. It throws your hormones out of balance. It causes inflammation. It can increase insulin resistance. It is all about stress. We need to get that stress under control. Now, stress is, quite often we just think, oh, stress is like the fight we had with our kids or our husband. Stress is so much more than that. Stress is the food that we eat. Stress is how our body is able to digest food. If you've got an issue with your gut and your gut isn't working properly, that is stress. If your liver's not detoxing properly, we've got all these toxins running through your bodies, that is stress. If we're being exposed to all these environmental toxins, that is stress. If we're, we're busy at work and we've got notifications going bing, 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 bing all the time, that is stress. If we're locked in our houses because we can't go out because there's this mad virus that's going to kill us all, that is stress. Well, that's what the news tells us every night anyway. So that is all stress. And this is one of the reasons why, and they've actually done a little bit of research on this, where they found that when everything kind of blew up in the world at the beginning of last year, women's symptoms that are associated with menopause skyrocketed. And it was all to do with the stress, because all of a sudden We have all this stress. We've got the news telling us all this stuff. We're told to stay home. We can't see our friends. All of this stress is just like through the roof at the moment. And it's, you know, here in Sydney, it's pretty bad because there's so much division going on, and all this impacts you. So if I was to say, if there was one single thing that you could do to reverse everything that's going on with menopause, to drop the weight, everything, that would be reduce your stress, but reduce it in all areas. But that's almost near impossible. We can't bring it down to nothing. It's like, so how can we manage that stress? What can we do? We control what we can control, and that's the food we eat, what we're exposing our body to, the way we're thinking, whether or not we're watching mainstream TV, whether or not we're on social media. Block out as much as you can, make the adjustments that you can, and then allow the body to find its a new balance. It's new, because the body's always trying to bring itself into balance. It just wants to keep you alive. That's its role. And it doesn't want to give up easily, so it just keeps balancing you. And this is one of the things, it spits out this stress hormone to keep everything going, because it doesn't want you to die. So yeah, stress is, stress is it. Deal with your stress and everything goes.
Yeah, wow. It's such a huge, big, all-encompassing part of our lives, and definitely more prominent than ever before. I think it's fabulous that you're able to empower women to cope, survive, and move forward in such a positive and empowering way through their menopause years. How do people connect with you to actually engage in one of your programs? How do they do that?
So my website is angelacounsel.com, so ANGELACOUNSEL.com. That's kind of my first point of call, or any social media, same name, Angela Counsel. On my website, you can actually grab a free ebook called The Secret to Getting Rid of Your Menopause Belly, I think it's called, something like that. And that's where I start to introduce the concept of personalized health and how different people are different. I also do run a regular webinar on the secret to getting rid of your menopause belly, and the information about that's in the ebook as well. And I'm about to run a 5-day understanding menopause workshop. But if anyone kind of follows me anywhere on the socials, I'm in Facebook way too often. I'm on Instagram, not quite as often, but probably almost as often. Yeah, you'll find me, and I've got lots of videos out there where I actually talk more about this, and I actually will be a lot more visible over on Instagram. I'm going to be doing a few more videos on Instagram. Women need to understand what's going on. Women need to understand what's happening with their hormones, because it's very unfortunate that you get to the age of, late 40s, early 50s, and you don't understand your hormones. But that's the way it is. I mean, I would love that if women understood from the time of 12 exactly what's happening to their hormones all the way through. But we're not educated on this. We don't know this. Unfortunately, your doctor doesn't know this in most cases unless they've done additional training. We need to understand our hormones. And when we understand our hormones, the fear goes. We now can actually understand what's happening, so we get back in control, rather than thinking that everything's out of control. You actually do have the ability to be in control, because you can choose the way you want to live your life. You don't need to be, for some women, yes, they might need to take HRT. I think the majority of women don't. It just depends on your individual situation. But even if you do, I still see that as a short-term thing whilst you address everything else that's going on. Because otherwise, when you come off the HRT, you're going to have bigger issues than when you went on it. That's one of the things that doctors don't talk to you about, is what happens when we actually stop taking HRT. And that can cause lots of issues, because we have a sudden crash in hormones. So it's like, let's take this window of opportunity and create the health that we want for the rest of our life, rather than just sitting back and waiting for it to happen. Because guaranteed, if you're not in control, you're going to find that your health comes down. This is something we need to work at for the second half of our lives. It doesn't come as easy as it did in the first half. We need to be conscious about the way we want to live our lives.
Thank you so much, Angela. It's fascinating, and it's a really important subject to really dive into and have more connected conversations with women, so that they do know that there are alternative solutions, and there's all sorts of opportunities to live better through this period of life. And so thank you so much for offering such a great insight into this subject.
Thank you for having me and allowing me to speak on this topic, because we need to be really open about this topic.
100%, and I love that that's your passion, that you're empowering others. I have one final question that I like to ask all of my podcast guests. It's an easy one. What does wellness mean to you, Angela?
Wellness means to me to be able to put on my hiking boots, put my backpack on, and to wander into the bush by myself and feel confident that I'm safe, I'm strong, I'm flexible, and I can climb over rocks. I can do whatever I want. That to me is wellness. When I can do that, everything is great in my life. If I couldn't do that, I don't know where I'd be, because all I want to do is I'd actually run away from home just so that I can walk in the bush. And I do sometimes. Lately, when it's been really stressful because of everything that's going on, I just pull my boots on. I'm lucky I live not far from a big national park, and I just go for a walk. That's wellness to me, to being able to have the freedom to do that whenever I want.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. It's been fun.
Thank you for joining the Wellness Warriors podcast. It's been a pleasure to have you online with us. If you enjoyed the series, please leave your review, subscribe and follow, and we look forward to sharing many more stories with you in the future.